Hello, welcome to McKinnis Family Farm. My name is Robert McKinnis. Today we're going to talk about a very important tool here in the farm, but it's not kept in the wood shop, and that is the family musket right here. Now, a musket is a muzzle-loading firearm, which means it is loaded by putting the charge and the ammo through the front of the firearm here. So firearms date back thousands of years, and it originally starts with the creation of gunpowder in 900 AD in China. Now, gunpowder was originally created for medical purposes, but people soon realized that the explosive properties of gunpowder can be used for other purposes as well, such as using it for rockets, using it for fireworks, and for firearms. Our original firearms were very simple. They were constructed by a piece of bamboo filled with gunpowder that would launch a spear. But as gunpowder became stronger and our projectiles became smaller, we replaced the bamboo tube with metal ones. So firearms spread throughout Asia, and they developed to pretty much what we know of today. We don't see any documentation of firearms actually reaching Europe until the early 1300s. This is either through trade with merchants on the Silk Road, or after the aftermath of the Mongol invasion of Europe. So when Europe got it, became a very prominent tool throughout Europe, and we brought it here to the New World with us. So out here on the American frontier, just about every single farm will have a firearm that they'll get from their local gunsmiths, and they're often kept in an area where they can easily be accessed, usually above a door or above a fireplace. So our firearm has a few pieces to it. We got a metal tube that goes all the way down here. That is called the barrel. The front, where the opening is called the muzzle. The back is called the breech. The inside of it is called the bore. Now, muskets have a smooth bore, so it smooths all the way down. You will find some firearms, though, that will have a groove cut along the inside that will cause a projectile to spin when it is fired. That would be called rifling. However, finding a firearm with rifling is extremely difficult. That's because the process to actually cut those grooves is very difficult to produce. So most of our firearms are going to be smooth bore. With our barrel too, we have two things that are on top that we'll use to aim called sights. We've got front sight right there, and the back sight over here. The part that we actually hold that is made out of wood is known as the stock. And there's two important parts for the actual firing it. The first part is known as the lock, which is this part right here. Now, the original firearms had something called a matchlock or a wheel lock. And they work very similar to each other. Pretty much you had a wick, like on a candle, that you kept lit. You would then take that wick and you would put it on a little pan that would sit about here that was filled with a fine powder. When you lit that powder, it traveled through a tiny hole in the barrel on the side here. It let your main charge inside, causing it to fire. So this was very common for hundreds of years, but there's a few problems with it. One, that you had to keep that wick lit all the time. So if you had a windy day, it'd be very hard to keep it lit. And if it rains, you couldn't use it. If you have wet powder does not ignite. So eventually they came out with what's called a flintlock, which is still very common today. It has a hammer kind of like this one. It would have a piece of flint with a steel plate that would be about right here. It worked the same way. It would come down and create a spark onto a small pan. That would light powder and come inside and then cause the rest of it to fire. So it's very common, and it does have a lot of benefits. You can use it in the wind. You can use it in a lot of other types of conditions. However, you still can't use it in the rain because you have that exposed pan of powder. That's when this lock came out. It kind of changed the game. This is known as a percussion lock. So it's very recently created. It was created about 20 years ago in about 1800s. And it is created with this hammer right here. And if we pull back on it, has a little nipple right here that has a hollow hole on it. When we pull this back and we put a little cap on this nipple right here that has a shock sensitive chemical inside of it, when that hammer would go and hit that cap, it would cause it to break, cause a spark to come inside, and cause the rest of the firearm to actually go off. Now, the percussion lock has the biggest advantage is that you can use it in all types of weather conditions as long as you keep the main powder inside dry. So, they're becoming more and more popular. They just came out 20 years ago. Still a lot of flint locks around. The next part to actually cause the lock to go off, though, is the trigger. So most firearms will only have one trigger. When you pull it back, it'll cause the lock to actually go off. The problem with a single trigger, though, it takes a lot of force to actually pull on that trigger to cause the lock to go off. And when you do that, it could cause a firearm to move on you a little bit, throwing off your aim. So some firearms, like this one, has a 2-trigger system. When you pull back on this back trigger here, it'll cause the lock to move from here to just slightly to almost firing position. So that when you go pull on this front trigger, it'll be extremely easy to actually cause the lock to go down and fire, making it what's called a hair trigger. So it makes it easier for people who have problems pulling back on that trigger. For example, my grandfather, just because he's up there in age now, he doesn't have the hand muscle to actually pull back on the normal trigger. So this firearm actually allows him to actually shoot still. This type firearm is hard to get with a 2-trigger system, but since my grandfather was a judge for the county for many years, he had the resources and the connections to actually purchase this firearm for our family. So those are the main parts of our firearm. Along with it, though, we have a few other tools. Biggest one being our powder horn. So the powder horn's main job is to keep the gunpowder dry. Right now, the most common gunpowder to use is the powder called black powder. So as the name implies, it's made from an animal horn, usually from either bison or cattle. We got a big one right here, and we got a small one right here. This one still has its cap on it. Has some nice little decoration too, be creative with them. So the main job is just to hold the powder. You can put powder directly from the horn into the firearm. However, if you put too little in, it's not going to fire properly. Put too much in, it can actually cause the full firearm to explode, which is not good. So with that, we'll use something called a measure. And the measure will make sure that we have a correct amount of powder every single time. Further out east, you'll find them more commonly made out of metal like brass or copper. Out here, we usually will find a lot of them that are going to be made out of wood, or in this case, we made this one from a tine off a deer antler. So, we take our measure and we pour it down the muzzle of our firearm with a little piece of paper. We'll then take another piece of our musket, and that is this part right here, known as the ramrod. You'll take that, put that down the barrel, and make sure that the powder and the wadding gets all the way back to the breech of the barrel, and make sure it's nice and snug. This will make sure that it is snug and make sure that all the powder will actually ignite. After that, you'll put the projectile in there, which is a round metal ball known as a round ball with a little bit more wadding. Just make sure everything's nice and snug, and then it's actually loaded and ready to be fired. So, muskets and other firearms do have many jobs. Here on the farm, though, its main job is used for hunting to help provide extra food for our family in rough months, especially during winter. We can also use it to help us gather fur, so that we can sell that in town in Findlay for a few extra bucks. And we can also use it to help protect our livestock from animals like coyotes that may try to eat them. So that's our family musket. Hopefully you enjoyed learning about them, and hopefully we'll see you here on the farm in this upcoming new year.